Agni parthene despina achrante Theotoke Infriani frefel parthene migdiralasa alendros
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Road to Paradise, hosted by the Orthodox Logos. My name is Ian Silver, and I'm here with my co-host Nathaniel Harmon.
Greetings.
And today we are re-recording an episode that we recorded last night, but unfortunately the intro music was playing over the first 15 minutes or so. So we are going to go ahead and give this another try. We are going to be discussing the lives of St. Patrick, the Enlightener of Ireland, and also Nathaniel's patron saint.
St. David of Wales. And that might be a good intro into some really fun medieval myths and legends, and also some legends of early Christendom in the British Isles. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Hopefully Ian won't be too bored.
I'm already bored. No. So yeah, this should be a good episode. We had intentions previously. We talked about doing an episode on cultural appropriation, but we decided to kind of keep those things separate from the lives of the saints.
Right.
That will be a topic that we'll be discussing this month, I believe.
Probably in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. So if you guys have any input on that or any questions, any other topics you want us to discuss, just leave a comment, send us a DM. Make sure to like, subscribe. The Road to Paradise Instagram is back up and running. We had to reset the password, so you can reach out to us there. And all the zines have shipped. If you've gotten them, please repost pictures of them, share them. And there will be another one coming out in April. It'll be the first of the bigger editions, I guess you could say. It'll have 2 months worth of content in it. And if you'd like to subscribe, go to orthodoxlogos.com. You can find the 6-month or the 1-year subscription there, as well as some other items. Everything helps with funding the website, funding Nathan's wine and tobacco. No, but also
It's actually whiskey and tobacco.
whiskey and
usage.
tobacco.
Not during Great Lent, but
yeah, it helps out, and it especially can give us and me an opportunity to give back to our parish. That's kind of the main reason I started a lot of this. And yeah, I would like to, anything helps. So let's see. I think the first thing we were going to dive into is the topic of the Russia-Ukraine war. And Nathan, I'll let you say a few words first about that.
right, since this is even though this is a podcast dedicated to older issues and, shall we say, more thematic worldview questions, the topic of the Ukraine-Russia war is something that affects us, especially as Orthodox Christians, because in case for anyone who doesn't know that's listening to this podcast, Ukraine and Russia are both Orthodox countries. So those are our brothers that are killing each other. And that is a really, really sad and unfortunate state of affairs. In this podcast, we're not going to try to take sides or say, okay, well, Putin is right or Zelensky is right. We're not going to do that here. But I am, and Ian agrees with me in this, we're going to call you all to pray that this conflict ends in a peaceful fashion, swiftly, without tremendous foreign interference, because that is something that generally leads to the, shall we say, increase in violence and the longevity of wars. So be praying. Also, if you live in the West and you're listening to this podcast, be aware that the majority of Americans and the majority of Westerners don't know anything about Orthodoxy. So be prepared for unpleasant interactions and respond graciously when that happens. Respond with love, because all of us that were converts at one point didn't know what Orthodoxy was. So be charitable, be loving, pray for our brothers and sisters who are fighting and dying, pray for peaceful resolution.
Yeah, I agree. I'm basically going to mimic that and just say that we need to take the heavenly stance on this situation, regardless of, what you believe or what your political affiliation. I think that instead of, being on the red side or the blue side, we could try to, put our aim towards the middle, especially when it comes to something like this, and just realize, like Nathan said, that there's Orthodox Christians that are dying. Both countries are suffering. And I think it's better you can have your opinions and you can know what you know. And there is things that the media isn't telling us, which we've known for a long time. But regardless of that, the most important thing is to just continue praying for those, especially during Lent. It's a kind of an interesting time that this has happened, but it's all God's timing. So,
well, as Pajot is very fond of pointing out, symbolism happens, and for anyone who's got a memory that's longer than 5 minutes ago, you'll remember that
100 years ago, right?
The start of this conflict in Ukraine mirrors the same pattern that happened with COVID, right? We started Holy Week, it was because I believe it was the week after Cheese Fair Sunday, after Forgiveness Sunday, that
the war
everything
was announced.
that COVID really started shutting down stuff in the West, and that led to the Lent that we had in 2020, where I say the Lent that we had, the Lent that we all spent in isolation and didn't get to see each other and didn't get to go to liturgy in most cases. So there's a lot more going on with this than just territorial fighting. There's a spiritual aspect to this that's frightening, and it's not new.
Yeah. So just remember to pray and attend as many services as you can, and show support, especially if you're not Orthodox and you're listening to this. Reach out to your Orthodox friends and, more specifically your Russian Orthodox friends, and make sure that they're doing okay. I know they probably some of them have family overseas that are involved in this conflict. And also, this is going to be a testing time where we're going to see persecution, and we're already seeing Orthodox churches being vandalized,
Right.
dirty diapers being thrown at Russian Orthodox churches' doorsteps because all Russians are to blame. That's what the media wants to tell you, and that definitely is not. It's not the case. So yeah.
And even were that the case, that action is contrary to Scripture. If all Russians were our enemies, which they are not, even if that were the case, we are to treat them with love and compassion. And the Russian Orthodox churches are not the enemy; they never have been. So, praying.
They've had a rough history,
Right?
And they continue to have a rough history. So I think we wanted to start the podcast off with that, and not just put it in the middle of everything. I think it's important to remember that, especially during Lent. So with that being said, we can go ahead and get into this. And if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, make sure to reach out to us. I would also like any of my Ukrainian followers or our Russian followers to reach out to us. We'd like to know what's going on. It's good to hear from people because the media is not telling us everything, and I've seen numerous things from both sides that you're not going to see on CNN or Fox. So I would like to have a dialogue with you guys, maybe even a Russian and a Ukrainian that are both Orthodox, and I think that could be something interesting. So if you are from either of those places, or you have family members there, or your clergy there, that would be, very great to hear from you as well. So may God bless you during this time, and stay safe. We'll be praying for you. Also, ask your parish if they can get a prayer in there during the litany for Russia and Ukraine. I think that's very helpful.
Right. There are some jurisdictions that are doing that, or at least there are some hierarchs who have put out prayers to be added to the litany. I don't remember precisely who actually has done that,
and not just for Ukraine. I've seen that, like, let's pray for Ukraine, and they leave out Russia, and it's like we have to be conscious that they're both our brothers and sisters. So,
and if I may make an allusion to a story that we've discussed before, when the Russo-Japanese War broke out I believe it was in 1901, late 19th, early 20th century. That was roughly contemporaneous with the work of Saint Nicholas, the Enlightener of Japan, right? Who, for anyone who's unaware, is a Russian Orthodox bishop. And so there's a community of Orthodox Christians growing in Japan that are under the Patriarchate of Moscow, technically. And when this war starts, Saint Nicholas's Japanese priests come to him and say, Vladika, what do we do? Who do we commemorate? Who do we pray for? This is bad. And St. Nicholas says, well, it's your responsibility and your duty to pray for your country and for your soldiers and for your government, and I will do the same for mine. and to pray that God in his wisdom brings this conflict to a swift end, and that the side that is the side that is right wins.
Yeah.
And so that's a really hard thing to do, because, especially in a situation where you undoubtedly have devout Orthodox men killing other devout Orthodox men. That's a really, really unpleasant situation, to say the very least. I know that's a rather catastrophic understatement, but we need to pray that this tragedy comes to a swift and peaceful resolution, and that anyone who wants this conflict to be prolonged for any reason is removed from trying to help direct it, because that's not something that needs to happen.
Yeah, I agree. Well, moving on.
So we're going to talk about St. Patrick, the Bishop of Arma and the Enlightener of Ireland, who also is the patron saint of Ian's oldest son. So
Yeah.
with that in mind, I will stop yakking.
That was confusing. My oldest son?
I mean, I guess
My
technically
only?
not, but we won't go there. Since I've already spoken a lot, we'll let Ian take it away.
Yeah, so St. Patrick, also known as the Bishop of Armagh, Enlightener of Ireland, is commemorated on March 17th, which is fastly approaching. And the other saint we'll be talking about is St. David of Wales, who there's some controversy over when
It's
the
either
day.
the first or the third of this
Yeah,
month.
we've already commemorated St. David of Wales, but yeah, St. Patrick, the Enlightener of Ireland, was born around the year 385, the son of Calpurnius, a Roman decurion, an official responsible for collecting taxes. He lived in the village of Bonavin, Tabernii, which may have been located at the mouth of the Severn River in Wales. The district was raided by pirates when Patrick was 16, and he was one of those taken captive. He was brought to Ireland and sold as a slave, and he was put to work as a herder of swine on a mountain identified with Slemish in the county of Antrim. County or country? County. During his period of slavery, Patrick acquired a proficiency in the Irish language, which was very useful to him in his later mission. He prayed during his solitude on the mountain and lived this way for 6 years. He had 2 visions. The first told him he would return to his home, and the second told him his ship was ready. Setting off on foot, Patrick walked 200 miles to the coast. There he succeeded in boarding a ship and returned to his parents in Britain. Sometime later, he went to Gaul and studied for the priesthood at Auxerre under St. Germanus. July 31st is when we commemorate St. Germanus. Eventually, he was consecrated as a bishop, and he was entrusted with the mission to Ireland, succeeding St. Palladius, July 7th. St. Palladius did not achieve much success in Ireland. After about a year, he went to Scotland, where he died in 432. Patrick had a dream in which an angel came to visit him, bearing many letters. Selecting one inscribed, "The voice of the Irish," he heard the Irish entreating him to come back to them. Although St. Patrick achieved remarkable results in spreading the gospel, he was not the first or only missionary in Ireland. He arrived around 432, though this date is often disputed, about a year after St. Palladius began his mission to Ireland. There was also other missionaries who were active on the southeast coast, but it was St. Patrick who had the greatest influence and success in preaching the gospel of Christ. Therefore, he is known as the Enlightener of Ireland. His autobiography, titled The Confession, tells of his many trials and disappointments that he endured. Patrick had once confided to a friend that he was troubled by a certain sin he had committed at a younger age. The friend assured him of God's mercy and supported Patrick's nomination as bishop, later turned against him and revealed what Patrick had done and told him, and in order to prevent him from consecration. Many years later, Patrick still grieved for his dear friend who had publicly shamed him. St. Patrick founded many churches and monasteries across Ireland, but the conversion of the Irish people was no easy task. There was much hostility, and he was even assaulted many times. He faced danger and insults, and he was reproached for being a foreigner and a former slave. There was also a very real possibility that the pagans would try to kill him. Despite many obstacles, he remained faithful to his calling, and he baptized many people into Christ. And why do you want to speak on why it was particularly hard for people in that time in Ireland to be converted? I know we had the Druids, and maybe you could briefly explain to people what the Druids were and, the challenges that St. Patrick faced and that he ultimately overcame. But now we're kind of seeing a digression again in in the Western world and in Europe back to, a pagan way of life.
I would say that St. Patrick faced what were probably normal levels of opposition, at least normative for the time in which he was evangelizing. However, one of the things that made the Celtic pagans particularly sketchy, for lack of a better phrase, was we'll say the Near Easternness of their religious praxis. So in Rome, it wasn't very common to hear of or see human sacrifice occur. They did it on occasion, but even when they did, it was like so things are going really, really bad. Hannibal's pretty close to Rome and thinking about knocking down the gates. So what do the Sibylline oracles say we ought to do? Oh, we've got to sacrifice 2 Gauls and 2 Greeks. Okay, we'll do that. But we're not actually going to kill them. We're just going to bury them alive, so that we technically don't kill them. So like even the Romans were really afraid, or not afraid, but they weren't keen on performing human sacrifice, unlike their most notable enemies, the Carthaginians, who were entirely copacetic with the practice. The Celts and the Gallic tribes were also very amenable to the practice of human sacrifice. If you read Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul, that's one of the things he talks about, is that they're totally okay with it. They have this practice of making a giant wicker man and filling it with captives and burning them alive, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that's not uncommon.
Sounds like Burning Man.
I mean, that's kind of where it came from, actually. So when St. Patrick shows up to Ireland, he's coming into a culture that is far more accepting of the practice of human sacrifice than, say, the Greeks or the Persians would be, right? So
Yeah, because even the Romans would sacrifice, but they would say things like, they would kind of just write it off.
well, the Romans did animal sacrifices,
But they
all
would
the
do-
time.
they would
didn't
have-
really do human sacrifices.
But when they did, they would be like, yeah, well, that was just like,
Right.
that was just one time.
Right. Well, it's not even that it's just one time. It's just one of those things where they do it when they have to, but they're still kind of like, I don't really know if we think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
You know, the best example, I think, of actually how human sacrifice worked for the Romans is, and it's actually kind of hard to even interpret as human sacrifice. It's more like a execution by deity, and that is when the Vestal Virgins, who are the priestesses of the goddess of the hearth, they're supposed to be virgins for the entirety of their service to the goddess, right? And if one of them slept around, and usually the way that this was determined was when, you know, great disasters were befalling Rome, like, you know, when the Goths, or not the Goths, when the Gauls invade Rome in the Republic, the period of the Republic, they discover by casting lots that one of the Vestal Virgins has been unfaithful to her vows. She's not been chaste. So what they do is they bury her in a tomb with a little bit of water and a little bit of food. And that's kind of their sacrifice to appease the goddess, even though they don't actually kill her, right? And that's how generally the Romans would engage in human sacrifice. They'd bury you alive because they didn't want to have their hands bloody with that, which is hilarious because the Romans weren't squeamish in other ways. Like, you look at the ways they killed people and what they did to villages and towns that they conquered that were rebellious, they're not exactly the people who are like, oh no, but there's women and children, maybe we should be nice. It's like, no, they really didn't care.
No.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. And forgive me, guys, for stepping out for a second. If you're watching this video, there was
What's the shovel?
It was the snow shovel that hangs up outside. I thought my neighbors were like hanging pictures, but it was just the snow shovel scraping against. So forgive me if you heard it, or if you're watching and you're wondering why I just abandoned Nathan after asking him a question.
Well, that snow shovel is a particular problem because for anyone who doesn't know, Ian and I are operating out of Flagstaff, which is Father Anthony Cook's hometown. And one of the things that Flagstaff suffers that no one talks about is catastrophic wind all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's bad.
It is. People think that, oh, you're in Arizona, it must be nice and warm. Yes, sometimes.
Well, I mean, 75 degrees in Flagstaff is warm, and then I'm complaining that it needs to go back down to 50 degrees because I'm sweating.
But anyway, yeah, that's why St. Patrick had
one of the reasons why
he had a lot of issues converting the Irish people of that time to Christianity. The Saint's Epistle to Caroticus is also an authentic work. In it, he denounces the attack of Caroticus's men on one of his congregations. The breastplate, also known as the Lorica, which is the prayer of St. Patrick, is also attributed to St. Patrick. In his writings, we can see St. Patrick's awareness that he had been called by God, as well as his determination and modesty in undertaking his missionary work. He refers to himself as a sinner, the most ignorant and of least account, and as someone who was despised by many. He ascribes his success to God rather than to his own talents. He says, I owe it to God's grace that through me so many people should be born again into him. By the time he established his episcopal see in Arma, is that how you say that?
I think so.
Arma, in 444, St. Patrick had other bishops to assist him, many native priests and deacons, and he encouraged the growth of monasticism. St. Patrick is often depicted holding a shamrock or with snakes fleeing from him. And if you don't know, one of the reasons he was holding the shamrock, or he used the shamrock, was to illustrate the doctrine of the Holy Trinity. The three leaves growing out of a single stem helped him to explain the concept of God, of one God in three persons. Many people now regard the story of St. Patrick driving all the snakes out of Ireland as having no historical basis. St. Patrick reposed on March 17th, 461, some say 492. There are various accounts of his last days, but they are mostly legendary. Muirchew says that no one knows the place where St. Patrick is buried. St. Columba of Iona, who we commemorate on June 9th, says that the Holy Spirit revealed to him that Patrick was buried at Saul, the site of his first church. A granite slab was then placed at his traditional gravesite in Downpatrick in 1899. So, with the idea of St. Patrick driving out the snakes from Ireland, if people don't know, you can Google this. There is no snakes in Ireland. I'm pretty sure there never has been. And, obviously some people contribute that to St. Patrick. The devout may say that it is due to St. Patrick. And then some people say it has to do with, where they're at geographically, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the main point to take from this is that he drove out the snakes being demons.
Right.
So do you have anything to say about that?
So whether or not there ever were snakes of the garden type variety in Ireland is something that I'm not going to discuss because I don't actually care. The thing that I find to be particularly interesting, though, like Ian said, is that this almost unequivocally refers to the teachings of the druids and the demons that people worshipped at the time. Do you have your anthologian handy so we can pull up the breastplate of St. Patrick?
Yeah, let me grab that.
Because that's got something interesting that I just thought about the other day. So one of the things that is said in this anthologian, the breastplate of St. Patrick, is he calls upon Christ to protect all Christians from druids, witches, and the spells of smiths, which is pretty interesting. Maybe that'll be something we talk about on a later date. But the line is, so this is towards the end of it, but it says, I call upon all these virtues against every hostile, merciless power which may attack my body and my soul, against the incantations of false prophets, against the black laws of heathenism, against the false laws of heresy, against the deceits of idolatry, against the spells of witches and smiths and druids, and against every knowledge that blinds the soul of man. And then he proceeds to discuss various ways that evil can be used to harm the godly. But what he's talking about in that section is effectively protect me from the servants of demons and the attacks of demons that can be called down upon others, upon anyone who is standing in opposition to these demons. So when St. Patrick drives snakes out of Ireland, he's driving the demons that the people worshipped out of that land. And I would submit to you that the evidence that he was successful in this is not actually just in the story. It's in the fact that Ireland has been a fairly devoutly Catholic country for the vast majority of its existence since St. Patrick's time. And this can be evidenced by the fact that the alphabet soup lobby and the baby murdering abortion lobby only very recently, I believe it's in the last 4 or 5 years, right? It was 2016 or 2017 that they were finally able to make these things legal in Ireland, which indicates to me that the snakes are trying to come back and in some way are succeeding in coming back. So there now are currently snakes in Ireland, but
A different kind.
well,
Of
the
a
same
different
kind
bro-
that he
yeah.
chased out.
Not of the garden variety.
Right, not of the garter snake variety.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, yeah, and for people that are interested, the Anthologian, I don't know if it'll focus.
It's from St. Ignatius
But
Orthodox
probably not.
Press.
There we go. It's a wonderful prayer book. It has your hours. It has everything in it. It has some beautiful iconography in it. But the Prayer of St. Patrick is honestly one of my favorites. It's becoming something that I say regularly. It's got a good length to it.
Mm-hmm.
You feel as if you've actually prayed a little bit, and it encompasses everything. Like you said, it mentions many different things, and especially, me working at this new medical in the medical field, the people I'm surrounded by, they're not all Christian.
Well, one of your friends is a straight out and out pagan, right?
Yeah.
He took the name of a Norse deity that will go unnamed, but if you know anything about the obsessions of contemporary culture, you can guess.
Yeah. But the thing is, when I come home and I pray the prayer of St. Patrick, or before I go to work, it's like I feel a little bit more at ease being around people who knows what they're partaking in. So yeah, I would pick up a copy of the Anthologian if you can. You can get it through St. Ignatius Orthodox Press. It's filled with great prayers and has all the things you need to get through. It can be a little intimidating. I think it's over 1,000 pages, but it's one of those things that it's good to have in your arsenal of prayer books. Because I know Nathan also, he uses the Saint Tikhon, and I need to grab that. Everybody says that that's their favorite prayer book, like their go-to.
I've got one from Saint Vlad's, and I've got the Saint Tikhon's one, obviously, and then I have this one from Saint Ignatius. I like all three of them, but I will say the Saint Tikhon's uses the most archaic English. It's not necessarily, like, if you've been Orthodox for any amount of time, one of the biggest issues I think that you face as far as detail-oriented things go is the slight variations in things like the Creed or Psalm 51.
Well, like the Anthologian
yeah.
says, "Holy God, holy strong, holy mighty," or it's
Holy immortal, I think is what it says still. Or,
yeah.
So you'll run across those slight linguistic.
Yeah, it says "Holy God, holy strong, holy immortal." And when I first read that, I was like, I kind of like it, but I also am so used to saying "Holy God, holy mighty,
Right.
holy immortal." So there's going to be different translations.
So my advice to anyone who's got these things memorized, don't ever read them out of the prayer book once you have them memorized, because if the prayer book is of a slightly different translation, it's going to screw you up so badly. It's like, I don't ever open a prayer book when I'm doing the Trisagion prayers. If I'm doing the Creed, I don't look and see what they've written down. I barely pay attention to Psalm 50 because I already kind of know the flow. I don't have it completely memorized, but like, as long as I know what the starting line is, I can usually finish the rest of it. So it's like, but the problem is I'm still what I'm saying for Psalm 50 is like a bastardization of 4 different versions of it.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay,
and it's also Psalm 51 in the
Hebrew, in the Masoretic translation. I can never also remember which one's the Greek. So if I say 50 or 51,
you're not wrong.
I'm technically right, but I never know which one I should use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I figured that'd be a good thing to let our listeners know that if you're interested in a good prayer book or good prayer, look up the St. Patrick breastplate, also known as the Lorica. It is a beautiful prayer. I have heard it before prior to Orthodoxy. I knew that it was a thing, so to speak, but I bought the Anthologian for myself, and then I got it for Nathan for his birthday, and he said, "Did you know that there was the prayer of St. Patrick in there?" And I didn't. I don't think I knew it. So I went back, I found it, and now I have it marked, and I couldn't recommend it enough.
It's a great prayer.
So yeah, moving on, that was a brief life of St. Patrick, the Enlightener of Ireland, who we commemorate here in a few days on March 17th. And Nathan, I know you're excited to nerd out on St. David and some of the medieval mythology that surrounds him and the areas that that he was around is, such as Glastonbury, which I'm sure we'll touch on quite a few times, because if you guys ever want to go to Glastonbury, there is a great music festival there. Just
I'm always
kidding.
impressed you can keep a straight face for as long as you do.
No, that is one of the reasons I knew of Glastonbury, is because there's like a pagan music festival there, which, I mean, there's some amazing performances from Radiohead and other bands that I still like, but
Radiohead's pagan?
no, but I'm saying like
I'm not surprised.
yeah, but I'm just saying in general, we'll touch on this, but it seems like they're trying to take back, like you mentioned, with the snakes re-entering Ireland and, Europe. It's like they're taking this sacred, holy site and they're blaspheming it with this music festival full of drugs and alcohol. So, yeah, let's go ahead and get into the life of Saint David, and I'll let Nathan take the mic for a minute.
Okay, so before we get into the life of Saint David proper, if you've never seen one of these, this is a copy of the Mabinogi, which is otherwise known as the four branches of Welsh mythology and poetry. A lot of the stuff that's talked about in Saint David's life has some reference in this text. And it's also got some really cool stories and some really cool poetry that, if you've ever read, what am I thinking of? Geoffrey of Monmouth's The History of the Kings of Britain, you'll know that the British are under the impression that they're descended from Troy, right? From Aeneas. They think that let me think, Brutus is Aeneas's grandson, I think, if my memory's correct. So there's some really cool poetry in here that talks about that, but definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, also, just so you guys know, we're still kind of working out some kinks for this. So if you see us looking in this direction, it's because we're trying to make sure that we're in focus or that the audio is good. Yeah, just so you guys know, because I know that some people are like, what are they like side-eyeing over there?
I'm just staring at Ian, making sure his beard doesn't get longer than mine. Okay, so I'm going to read a brief bit from the life of Saint David. It's not... it's from a book called A Staff to the Pilgrim by a fellow named Gabriel Cooper Rochelle. It's a really interesting book.
Can you show that for people?
I don't agree with everything that he says.
There you go. It probably won't focus because I have it set to focus on us. Just hold it back by your face. There we go.
Okay. Worth checking out. It's got the lives of several Western saints, well, British saints specifically, but it's totally worth checking out. And also, I like it because the author talks about using the Jesus prayer when he rides bikes, which is something that I do. So I've got some.
I'm going to say, when I first found Orthodoxy and it was summer and I was riding the bike or running, when I would do like multiple miles.
See, you're insane though. No one actually likes to run.
No, of course not. But what I did find myself doing was the Jesus prayer. And it really kind of just made me not even think about, I would stop looking at my watch.
Right.
And I'm like, wow, okay, I'm halfway up Snowball already,
Oh man, I haven't done Snowball in a long time.
So yeah. But yeah, I think that's a great thing to do, is to be, if you go to any of the monasteries, you're going to see the monks or the nuns walking around, like whispering, whatever. Right. People are like, oh, what are they saying? Most likely they're saying the Jesus prayer throughout their whole day, no matter what they're doing, what they're working on. And it's a great practice. It's something I've been trying to do while I'm at work in the medical field, is I have my headphones in, listening to homilies and saying the Jesus prayer as I put together heart stents. And, so it kind of helps me. It just kind of takes my mind off of the environment I'm in.
All right. So Saint David reposed in the year of 589. Tradition holds that he was born in Cardiganshire in Wales, and his mother was the holy woman Saint Non, who was sainted and famous in her own right, both in Wales and Brittany. His father was the King Sanctus, or as we'll get into later with no Garan here, whose name befits the man's faithfulness as well. The author and compiler of the life of Saint David says that his birth was surrounded by natural wonders, in particular a thunderstorm of great intensity. This, of course, is a way of saying that David was in some sense a second Christ, at least to the Welsh people. David began his life in the church as a monk at the monastery called Irhenlwyn, or the Old Grove. He showed a deep love for Christ, and the church which manifested itself in a life of holiness characterized by simplicity and charity towards others. David spent a decade in training at the Old Grove, learning the psalms and hymnody of the church, worship life, and leadership. Developing a passion for the faith led him into mission work. In this he joined many other Celtic saints who followed the threefold path of martyrdom, which included wandering for the sake of planting the faith. This is known as white martyrdom. According to Rigfark, St. David founded no less than a dozen monasteries as far afield as Glastonbury and Bath. He founded his first monastery near his birthplace. In time, it became the site for the 12th century Cathedral of St. David. The town now bears his name, and the cathedral is the site of pilgrimage on March 1st each year, which is his feast day. St. David's sanctity is demonstrated by his asceticism. He taught the monks of his monasteries to live an austere life, spending most of the day in silence. They drank no wine, eating mostly vegetables and bread, and precious little meat. And the meat that they did eat was in the form of fish. Because leeks were a plentiful and regular part of their diet, they eventually became a symbol for Wales itself and remain the national plant to this day. So if you ever go to Wales on St. David's Day, you'll see people running around with leeks stuck in their hats. It's actually kind of hilarious.
Nice.
And pretty awesome.
You didn't get the chance to visit the cathedral because you were there.
I did not, because I was an idiot and was... Well, I also didn't do the typical American student thing. Like, I didn't go to the UK or to Europe and just, like, hike around. I actually only traveled out of Swansea, which was the town I lived in, once. The rest of the time twice. Once for a history conference.
The rest of the time you just stayed in the town that you were in.
I stayed in the town, hung out in the town, got to know some of the local people, and hung out on the beach a lot, which, knowing my phobia of water, is a hilarious thing in retrospect. But
yeah. Do you not like flying over water?
I was terrified both times I flew over.
That makes me so happy.
Why? That I was sitting there wishing I was being terrified that I was going to crash and
Yeah.
somehow survive the crash. And be
You would
stuck
rather
in the water.
crash into land?
Yes.
But then you're definitely dead.
Yes, but I'm not going to have to sit there in the water for a couple of days
Alright,
and die.
fair
which
enough.
Sounds horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool to go there. It's kind of like their 4th of July, but it actually has overtones of holiness, even though most Welsh don't actually know.
We have hot dogs.
That's the single most perverse thing that
I know,
we consume in
but
the U.S.
But still, we have do they have hot dogs?
No, why would they have hot dogs?
I don't know. You said it's 4th of July.
I said it's kind of like the 4th of July. Okay. Okay. Where were we? No written rule survives from St. David's monasteries, but we can infer that it was similar to the austere rules that governed other monasteries of Celtic leaders like St. Columba or St. Gildas, which in turn were grounded in the approach of St. Anthony of the Desert and St. John Cassian, whose rule brought Anthony's influence to the west. St. David's approach to sanctity, however austere, freed he and his monks from for charitable works. Rigfark is lavish in his praise for the work of St. David, caring for the brethren and feeding the multitude of orphans, wards, widows, needy, sick, and feeble pilgrims. So he started, so he continued, and so he ended. According to tradition, he lived for over 100 years and reposed on Tuesday, March 1st in 589. It is said that his monastery was filled with angels as Christ received his soul. St. David's reputation is based on his kindness, compassion, and understanding of the needs of others, and there is no record of violence or even harshness on his part. Indeed, he cared for the little things of life, by which he seems to have meant those attitudes and actions that bind society together in unity under God. This is holiness or sanctity at a very primary and basic level, a level from which we can all learn. Interestingly, St. David has not always been the patron saint of Wales. That honor was originally bestowed on St. Gwenfrew, who is also a phenomenal saint. Maybe we'll talk about her at some point. But when her relics were translated from Holywell to Shrewsbury, and thus outside the borders of Wales, the honor was transferred to St. David, on whom it rests to this day. And his Troparion proceeds thusly, his Troparion proceeds thusly. Having worked miracles in thy youth, founded monasteries, and converted the pagans who sought to destroy thee, O Holy Father David, Christ our God bless thee to receive the episcopate at the place of his resurrection. Intercede for us that our lives may be blessed and our souls may be saved. Amen.
Amen.
So interestingly, as that brief prayer insinuates, St. David was elevated to the rank of bishop in the Holy Land in Jerusalem, which is pretty awesome. And also, based on the date of his death in 589, he was born in 489 if he lived for 100 years, which puts him as roughly the immediate successor to St. Patrick in some ways.
Yeah.
Or at least he's beginning his
around the
life
same
and his
time.
ministry around the time that St. Patrick dies, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
One of the stories that text doesn't touch on, although first, before we go there, have you any comments you wish to make concerning the life of St. David?
No, honestly, no, not at all. I just like hearing about it. I know it's good. I think it's really important for us to, we can pick a saint or be given a saint's name when we're baptized, but some people don't spend the time getting to know anything about them. And they're like, oh, this is my saint. This is my baptismal name. Oh, where's he from?
Cappadocia.
Egypt. It's like, yeah,
Right.
exactly. So yeah, I appreciate the in-depth, the depthness.
Also, before we go on to the story I was going to tell in a moment, his last words according to his disciples proceeded thusly: "Be steadfast, brothers, and do the little things." And last night we had a good discussion on this, so hopefully we can kind of recapitulate it because it was
Yeah.
a really awesome discussion.
Yeah, and the little things are, especially as an Orthodox Christian, the most important.
Right.
The little things such as waking up and praying before you get on TikTok. Before you're on TikTok land, I think waking up and, saying an Our Father, or like you said, the Creed or Psalm 50, 51, those types of things are really important. Or paying attention to the beggar on the street versus, just turning the corner or munching on the food you have in your car as you see him begging for food. I think it's important as Orthodox Christians, or as Christians in general, to do the little things such as prayer, fasting, almsgiving, confession, repentance, and service. And like I said, these little things are actually the fruits of what it is to be a Christian, and they're the things that, bring us closer to communion with God. And I think it's important. So yeah, be steadfast and do the little things. And I know you can probably elaborate on some other things and maybe even have some sort of story or something. I'm sure you do.
I see you're pigeonholing me yet again.
Yes.
I feel like that's the only reason I'm here, is to tell ridiculous stories of like 5 other people in the world now.
Yeah.
Because they're ridiculous and no one else cares to know them. So the story that actually comes to mind is relating to a character in a book called Kristen Lavren's Daughter, which, for anyone who's watched the last couple of podcasts, you know that I'm taking a couple of classes at through the Albertus Magnus Institute, which is a free undergrad kind of deal, and it's awesome.
we can put the link in the description for people that are interested as well.
They're not sponsoring us at all, but they're a Catholic.
I mean, you can
They're a Catholic online university, and they're awesome.
actually. I'm just kidding.
I mean, I wouldn't turn it down.
No.
They're really cool. But so the book that we're going through right now is called Kristen Lavren's Daughter, and there's a character in there who's particularly interesting, a fellow by the name of Erland. And he's, I think, one of the best examples of someone who expects to do the big things, but isn't faithful in the little things. So his main introduction, aside from random people talking about him, is saving the main character, Kristen, from being raped. And it's an awesome scene because he shows up and he's like the quintessential knight in shining armor.
Yeah, the best, the ideal hero archetype.
Yeah, like, and it's not that he's, saving a friend from being killed. Like, he's literally saving a novitiate at a monastery from being raped. So, like, he appears to be, in that moment, the most virtuous of men, right? He's fantastic. You can't help but like him. But then, as the story progresses, you realize that one moment of heroism does not make a virtuous man, because he has all these other things that he's dealing with that he hasn't dealt with well. And because of that, he's not faithful in the little things. And as a result, like, that moment when he saves Kristen is kind of the high point of his life. Because there comes a point when, Kristen gives birth to their son, and his response is to be upset because now he's not the sole recipient of Kristen's affection. And it's like, that's pretty bad, man. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I get that if you're a husband or a father, that can be something that's like, oh yeah, that's a sentiment that can show up, but you need to shove that aside. You need to take that out back and kill it.
Yeah, this is a helpless little being that needs all the love it can get. You're good.
Right. You're okay. And you were once the recipient of that love from your mother.
Yeah.
So get over yourself.
That's how the baby's there, because there was love involved, hopefully.
Right. So going back to what St. David said about being faithful in the little things, just because you grasp at
The
heroism
opportunity.
in a big way doesn't mean that you have the foundation built to support that. Right. So if it is far better to be a good man, like Ian was saying, give a couple bucks to a homeless man when you see him. Do your prayers in the morning. It's far better to live a life having been that man and never having had to step forward and be a hero, because you are the kind of man at that point who could have been a hero. Just because you didn't find yourself in the position to act in such a
Yeah,
way.
and it's also like, how do you, for lack of better terms, continue riding that wave? If you save someone from being raped, it's like now you're just waiting for the next big opportunity. It's like you're not
You're
even
not
paying
built up to it.
Yeah, you're not paying attention to, I mean, not everybody, but you're not paying attention to all the little things that need to be taken care of. It's like you're just waiting for another moment to be a hero. But you can be a hero all the time for your community, for your family, for your friends, for your parish, by doing the little things and encouraging others to do that as well. And I'm not saying we're good at it, but it's definitely something to keep in the back of your mind. It's do the little things. They matter more than you could ever realize, and people will see it, you know.
Don't strive to be an Achilles.
Yeah,
I'll just
exactly.
put it that way. As everyone who's ever read the Iliad knows, Achilles is not the most admirable character out there.
No.
Be a Hector, and yeah, be Hector. Don't be Achilles.
Be Hector. So yeah, what about Glastonbury? I know there's a lot of holiness and sanctity
Right.
surrounding that area in regards to Saint David, but also in regards to others, you know, such as King Arthur.
So
That is where his remains were.
we'll get there in a minute. You can't spoil that just yet.
Okay.
So Glastonbury is very important because, as it says,
Radiohead Music Festival.
No, to be honest, I made some comment about Radiohead a minute ago. I don't even know what they sound like. I've probably heard them before, but I could not pull their music out of a lineup if my life depended on it.
I could sing you a song.
I think I can live without that.
All right, guys, we're going to start a Patreon account. If you'd like to hear me sing Radiohead songs,
I thought we were going to get away from this.
go ahead.
So one of the other events that happens in St. David's life is he goes to found a new church at Glastonbury. And when he goes to do so, Christ appears to him in a vision and says, "A church has already been dedicated here to my mother. You don't need to do, this is already a holy place. You don't need to start to found another church here." And so St. David says, "Oh, okay, that's awesome." And he leaves. So the foundation of that church goes back to St. Joseph of Arimathea, right? So who is St. Joseph of Arimathea? Ian, for anyone who doesn't know.
I don't know.
That's a lie.
I don't know.
Okay, so St. Joseph of Arimathea is the one who donates his tomb to Christ, which was not utilized for very long. But he gives a clean-cut tomb to God, or to Christ, and Christ obviously occupies it for a few days and then comes back and it's no longer necessary, right? And then it becomes a sacred place. So St. Joseph is a tin merchant according to church tradition, and he spends his time, how shall I say? He eventually, towards the end of his life, goes to the UK, right, on pilgrimage, and he brings with him a staff, and he also brings with him the Holy Grail, which maybe we'll talk about at a different point. But he brings these two items with him specifically, and he and his followers show up to Glastonbury, which at the time is an island in the middle of a swamp. So he shows up there. They're tired. He sticks his staff in the ground, and lo and behold, as happens when apostles tend to do things like this, the staff becomes alive again, right? And for anyone who's ever done any hiking with a walking stick, if you walk from Palestine to Britain,
Yeah.
your staff is not alive by the time you get to Britain.
Unless God has allowed it to be.
Right. But even so, it's probably, unless God is doing that, it's not alive. You have a dead piece of wood with you. So he sticks this thing in the ground, and you look like you're about to make a snarky comment.
No, not at all. I'm listening.
It comes to life. It flowers.
Jeez, Nathan.
That is like
Is
most
that-
of you and I's relationship. So the staff comes to life, right? And according to tradition, it blooms twice a year, once in May and once in December.
Pascha.
And I've got this sense that there's some sort of significance to that.
Yeah, maybe like Pascha and the Nativity.
That could be it. That could be it. And interestingly, jumping forward in time for a moment.
Or maybe for the Easter Bunny.
No.
Okay.
So, interestingly, there is still a shrub, a small tree that grows on Glastonbury that is not native to Britain. You know where it's native to? If you were to hazard a guess, what would you think? Probably China.
China. China.
Okay. This is why we can't have nice things, people. This is why I'm drinking a $4 bottle of wine right now.
I would say where he traveled from. No?
Right. So the tree that grows there is called a Levantine Hawthorne. And as you might guess based on the name, it's from the Levant, which is another name for the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, otherwise known as Palestine.
So from him traveling with his staff, placing it in the ground, it sprouted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So there's that. There's also, though, another story, and that is that St. Joseph also buried the Holy Grail at the foot of Glastonbury Tor. And there is still a holy spring that is flowing with reddish tinged water. Now, the argument from the modern materialists is that is the case because there's high iron content in the water.
That's like the scientific argument.
Right, but that's also the how, not the why.
But also there's iron in blood.
I'm sorry, I always get that straight
The
up.
why.
It's the why, not the how.
And there's also a high...
Or I don't know, you know what I mean.
There's a lot of
It's the mechanistic
iron.
explanation, not the justification for why that's happening.
Yeah, but there's also a lot of iron in blood.
Correct.
So they're not
Hemoglobin-
proving anything by saying, oh, there's just iron. There's like an iron deposit here.
And there's another story that we've talked about before, the life of Saint Melangelo of Wales, or Melangelo. I can never think of how to say her name properly, but where she was beheaded and where she was resurrected by God, a holy well came bubbling out of the ground as
It's
well.
still
and that's
there.
red tinged water too.
Yeah, still there. People take pilgrimages to
Yeah.
these holy sites.
Right. So there's that to consider. So all that to say, Glastonbury is extremely important, right? But here's another interesting thing as well. Going back to St. David. So as we've discussed, let me look at my notes real fast and see if I can read them. So the lineage of St. David of Wales proceeds thusly. The King Caroticus, Gwyddnogaran and his wife Non. And then St. David has a sibling. That's his parents. But Saint David,
Elphin?
Elphin is the sibling's name. And for anyone who's read that text that I talked about a few minutes ago, the Mabinogion, the name Elphin will sound really, really familiar. And that's because Elphin is the foster father of Taliesin.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Who is known as...
What do you mean? Who was his previous name?
Yeah.
Was Gwion who's the servant of a woman named Caradwen, who was not necessarily the nicest person, but we'll talk about her at some other point. But she makes this concoction to try to make her son the wisest man who's ever lived. Gwion is her servant, and he's supposed to be stirring this cauldron to make sure that when the time comes and this potion is ready, her son will be able to have it, and he'll become this wise man and become somebody effectively.
Sounds a little...
Pagan?
Yes.
Very pagan. So what ends up happening, though, is Caradwen falls asleep, which you're not supposed to do if you're making magic things. You're supposed to stay awake. So she falls asleep. The potion gets ready, and there are a couple of different variations on what happens, but one of them is that the potion, because it's boiling, obviously splashes out of the cauldron and lands on Gwion hand, and he, because what do you do when you get burned? You suck on the burn. He does that, and he ingests the potion, and then he becomes wise. Caradwen wakes up, sees what happens, and starts to chase him to kill him. And in the Mabinogion, one of the things that's said is, and because he was so wise, he perceived that she was angry and would stop at nothing to destroy him. And I read that and go, yeah, well, if you're a servant and you took the potion you weren't supposed to have, it doesn't take a very wise man to figure out that your mistress is going to be kind of perturbed and might have no goodwill towards you at that point. So Caradwen chases Gwion and eventually, to hide from her, he turns himself into a single grain of wheat in a storehouse full of wheat. Right? So actually a pretty good plan, but because she is also clever, she turns herself into a hen and eats all the grain, including him. And she effectively impregnates herself. It's kind of weird. And when she finally gives birth to him, because he sits in her belly for 9 months,
As a hen?
when she's a hen, yeah. And so when she gives birth to him, she realizes she can't kill him. So she puts him in a basket and throws him off into either a river or the sea, depending on who you talk to. And all this occurs right about the time that King Arthur becomes the King of Britain, right? So Gwyn Bach is on the sea floating around for approximately 40 years, and he's eventually caught by Elphin.
40 years?
40 years, which has some really curious analogies to
That's what I was saying.
Moses.
Yeah, just the
The
40.
God Seer. So he's floating around for 40 years, and he eventually gets caught in a salmon weir, which is just a salmon trap, effectively, usually on a stream. So he gets caught in that. Elphin finds him. The son of Gwyddno Goran finds him. And when he opens up this basket, he sees a child's shining face. And so he names him Taliesin. So that's St. David's foster nephew, right? And so at the time when St. David's alive, it's only theoretically been, I mean, King Arthur's memory is still pretty fresh. It's only been 40 years.
Yeah.
So now back to Glastonbury Tor. Everyone says King Arthur's a myth, right? But there's actually some really interesting archaeological evidence that we won't get into aside from the bit that happens on Glastonbury. So for anyone who knows, King Arthur is killed by Mordred, right? He stabs Mordred with a spear. Mordred, in an act of impressive and also kind of disconcerting spite, pulls himself up the spear, pulls out his sword, which is actually Arthur's sword, and hits Arthur
Strikes him in the head.
Right? So in 1181, the monks at Glastonbury are doing some repair work and some excavation at their abbey because there's been a fire. And as they're digging, they find this huge oak tree trunk that's been buried, and they realize it's been turned into a coffin. So they open it up, and in that coffin is a very large man with a head wound and a woman's skeleton laying next to him. And there's also a lead cross that says, let me see if I can read my own handwriting again. Here lies buried the famous King Arthur on the Isle of Avalon. Which is pretty interesting because this happens before some of the more well thought out Arthurian legends show up. Right? This actually happens before Geoffrey of Monmouth writes the history of the kings of Britain and various other interesting texts. So there's also, so the cross in there, I already said that. So one of the arguments that people put forward is, oh, well, no, this is obviously ridiculous because, the monks were just trying to gain a lot of
notoriety.
Notoriety. But the problem with that is they're already at the site where Joseph of Arimathea planted his tree and the Holy Grail is buried.
Yeah, they're good.
So they're already squared away. And we have 16th century drawings and commentary from this cross that indicate that it's probably legit.
Yeah.
And that also there's other evidence that shows it because carbon-14 dating is not particularly good, that there's probably been a church, what's the word? A permanent structure used as a church that has been on Glastonbury since at least the 6th century, which means it's probably been a site of pilgrimage, and there's probably been more rudimentary structures
during the time of St. David.
A long, long time. So it's already a holy site, known to be a holy site. So all that to say, guys, through the life of St. David and the life of St. Patrick, demons are real, are and were active in the UK.
Still are.
And also, King Arthur's real.
Yeah. I think we're going to have a couple episodes on King Arthur. I also know that at some point we're going to get into the Marble King.
Oh, yes. This is going to be fun. I didn't know we were going to do an episode on that.
Yeah, we definitely should. And I don't know, do we have anything else to say before I make a few announcements?
I don't know. I would say no. I don't think I have anything.
Cool. Well, yeah, that was today's episode on St. Patrick and St. David of Wales. We are going to continue doing Lives of the Saints and separate them probably from our regularly scheduled
random rants.
Yeah, sometimes we just get ideas and text them to each other, and then they end up being episodes. But that being said, hopefully we're going to have some special guests on soon. I won't speak too much on it, but it will be definitely in line with what we're talking about now. and it'll be a continuation of these topics, and maybe even some of the guests that we have on would like to talk about the Marble King. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot more content coming soon. If you have anything that you want us to talk about, like I've said before, please reach out to us. Don't be hesitant if you'd like us to say a prayer for you, and obviously please pray for us as we continue doing these things, and hopefully we're not saying anything out of line or, damning ourselves.
Any advice we give on this, talk to your spiritual father.
Yeah, definitely.
Ask your priest or your spiritual father first.
Yeah.
Because just because something is good doesn't mean it's good for you.
Yeah.
Just because something is good for me doesn't mean it's good for Ian, and vice versa.
Exactly. So yeah, always seek the counsel and spiritual guidance of your spiritual father, your parish priest, or a member of clergy that you trust. Nathan, that was disgusting.
That felt so good.
If anybody's watching, Nathan just had a full-blown exorcism on camera. I don't know what that was.
That was I popped my neck. Can you not pop your neck?
Not like that.
Don't hurt yourself, Ian.
Yeah.
I'd hate to explain to your bride why I'm having to take you to the ER.
Oh, she'll see it. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of The Road to Paradise.
Join us on the Instagram page. I promise that if you do that, you'll get to see me drink terrible beer, terrible whiskey, or maybe even my own homebrewed kvass, which may or may not kill people. We don't know yet. And I'll smoke terrible cigars and really good pipe tobacco.
Literally had my wife take a sip of that.
Well, she's not dead yet, and I haven't died yet.
We don't know yet. We haven't opened the door.
Well, I don't think it would have been quiet.
True.
It's my suspicion. We'll see. We'll look at this scientifically here shortly.
No, but in all honesty, have a blessed Lent. And like we said, be steadfast and remember to do the little things. May God continue to bless you, and may the Lord have mercy on all of us. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
God bless.